Next from Chicago, David Hiller, CEO of the Robert R. McCormick Foundation, gives an address at the City Club of Chicago on ways the state and educators can improve the civic engagement and knowledge of the Illinois public. This runs about 40 minutes.
All right. So the truth is that if everybody was like everybody in this room in terms of civic engagement, we'd be a lot better off. But everybody is not like all the people in this room. So we commissioned some field research to measure how civically engaged and knowledgeable members of the public are, and we'd like to share a piece of it.
My name is Georgia.
Georgia, what do you do?
I work at a phone company.
We want to see what you know about current events versus pop culture.
Okay.
Who was the Vice President of the United States? He would become president if something happened to Obama?
Oh.
He would be the Vice President of the United States?
Jeez. No.
No? Who rode on top of the wrecking ball naked singing?
Oh, Miley Cyrus.
Miley Cyrus, of course. Miley Cyrus, of course.
Miley Cyrus.
I mean, is it odd that you know Miley Cyrus but not the Vice President of the United States?
Yeah.
So that was our researcher, Dr. Leno. So that is funny, and it does make the point, but I wish it were not just a laugh. We wish it were only a laughing matter, but it's not. So remember the hand poll we took in the group just a couple of minutes ago. So here's what it looks like for all adults in Illinois who voted in the last election. 41%.
Is that registered or eligible?
Those are of all eligible people. So adults who would be qualified. So percentage of all people, not just registered. 41% discuss politics with family and friends, which is in a lot of these, it's a very strong indicator of the disposition to be involved in the public life of your community. Only 27%. Contacts with public officials, 11%. And the numbers for young adults are even lower, with just, for example, on voting, 24% of voting in the last election. So now ask ourselves, does this level and quality of civic engagement affect the quality of our government? Well, how are we doing in Illinois? The state of our state is widely reported on. A Gallup poll in 2014 reported that 70% of people in Illinois had little to no trust in state government, which was the lowest of any of the 50 states. And it goes on from there, our credit rating, our business climate, officials who are off somewhere else. So I don't want to dwell on this, and I don't want to be negative, and you all know as well as I do that we have issues that we need to work on in terms of the civic life in our city and state and the effectiveness of our government. And we also know that there's no single answer that's going to fix all these things. But what I did want to talk with you about today is and consider having you help with, is the role that our schools can play in educating active and effective citizens. And you know why we should have faith that our schools can do this? That's because historically they always did. If you go back to the founding fathers and Jefferson and Washington and the colonial times, what they said was, we need to educate all the citizens in our country so that our liberties are going to be secure for the future. And it was true then. It was, if you read the arcane history, it was true about the organization of the Northwest Territories, which provided ultimately for the creation of the state of Illinois and the other Midwestern states. Education was a central part of the purpose in the setting aside of property in the townships to support public education. Carries through the rest of our history through Horace Mann in the 1900s and Dewey, John Dewey, Tom Dewey too probably, but John Dewey at least in the 1900s. And this was this vision of our schools as central in preparing our young people to be active citizens. And this remained a big central part of our schools until recently. So think about your own education. How many of us in this room remember doing civics or government in high school or in middle school? See? Most of us. So what happened to it? Well, it got marginalized. It got cut back because of a lot of otherwise well-intentioned, very well-intentioned efforts to improve reading and math and the requirements of the No Child Left Behind and all the standardized testing that went with it, and add in budgetary pressures that are on everybody. Civics, and along with some other things, got pushed to the side. And in Illinois, it got lost as badly as it did anywhere. So Illinois is now one of only 10 states that do not require a civics or government course to graduate. And as a result, 4 out of 10 students in Illinois graduate without any civics or government course. And beyond that, too many of the government courses that are offered are not very good. And a lot of them focus on rote memorization of facts, like the name of the vice president, which evidently some of them don't even do that so well. And like a lot of things, it's worse for poor people and people of color. Research shows that low-income people and minorities have way less access to quality civic learning experiences. And so what happens is we pile on top of academic achievement gap, we pile a civic engagement gap that flows through and results in almost all forms of civic and political engagement being way lower for minorities. And the gap is especially big for the Latino community with its very large numbers of recent immigrants and English language learners. And with the Latinos being the largest and fastest growing minority in the state, this is plainly something that we have to do better with. The good news is that we know how to do better, and we do know what works, and there are people in the city and in the state, and many right here in this room, who are doing it. So let's talk about that. First, there's a very strong research base for the effectiveness of quality civic education. And I want to thank our colleagues at the University of Chicago and UIC, and there's work, Roosevelt and Loyola and DePaul, all of whom have been so active in leading work about quality civic engagement. On the foundation side, our friends at the Spencer Foundation, including Diana Hess, who is herself an expert in civic learning, have made big contributions. So, and this work shows that quality civic learning really does work. And what does it do? It improves knowledge, which is the foundation. Importantly, it builds critical thinking skills. It increases news literacy and an inclination to follow news and current events. And it builds the ability to work with other people and get things done, which is important. And guess what? These are not just civic skills. These are the skills that all of us need to be successful in our community, the so-called 21st century skills. So there should be no false choice between, do we educate people to be our next great employees, or do we educate people to be our next great citizens? Civic education, as part of a well-rounded education, can help with all of those things. And maybe the best news of all is that the research that I talked about also shows that if you have quality civic education, not only is it important and impactful, but it's way more important in determining civic engagement in the future than race or ethnicity and income level. So there's no permanent destiny that says if you grow up poor or you grow up in a minority community that you can't be part of the community and an effective citizen. We know that's not the case. What are some of the key ingredients of a quality civic education? And we're going to be talking too about some of it where it's actively being done in the city. First, classroom instruction starts with great teachers. We're blessed that we have a lot of them in the city and state. Second, great teachers know that it's not just about them doing what I'm doing, standing up in front of a classroom and talking, but it's about figuring out how to engage the students. And one of the very most effective ways to do that is through the discussions in the class of controversial issues and current events. And when you think about it, if we don't do it there, where are we going to do it? I mean, the young people need to practice, we all need to practice having civilized conversations about things that are going on in the community. It's like Jay, exactly as the governor was saying, like we do here at the City Club. But a lot of people are, it can be controversial itself to even bring up talking about controversial issues in the classroom. It's not the easiest thing in the world to do. Teachers need practice and support in doing it, but it has been shown to be such an influential part of a quality civic education. Third, service learning, getting students actually out in the community working on real world problems, extracurricular activities almost of any sort to get kids in leadership roles and planning and doing things. And simulations of democratic processes like model legislatures and debates or Supreme Court sessions. And these have been established. The research is good, and you see it really works. In Illinois, a lot of this work has been developed and championed and put together by a wide range of all sorts of people. The universities I've mentioned, the foundations that have been supportive, the CPS, the policy leaders, teachers, administrators, and it really is a big team effort. Many of these people have also come together over the last 10 years as the Illinois Civic Mission Coalition in the state that was founded back in 2004 by the Constitutional Rights Foundation. A lot of the members are here today, and I thank them for everything they do. And the coalition has been focused on developing and refining these practices, putting them into a blueprint for how to do this in schools and districts across the state. And it has also developed policy recommendations and will continue to advocate for those. One of the things it does as a way of modeling these practices, it launched a program called the Democracy Schools Initiative, which are basically schools that voluntarily step up and they do a self-assessment and they say, we want to be one of the best in the world at this democratic practice and civic learning. And currently we have 31 of them, 31 of the schools across Illinois. We have 2 democracy schools and counting in Chicago. And I think both of the principals are here with us today. Elias Estrada of Alcott College Prep and Karen Bourne of Hancock. Karen, I saw, and Elias, are you both here? Could you stand up and, please, there he is, good. Thank you for what you do. And their colleague and boss, our wonderful CEO of the public schools, Barbara Bird Bennett, and her team at CPS have been the ones leading the work to restore all of this quality civics to our Chicago schools. Importantly, launching the Global Citizenship Initiative now in more than 25 high schools, and with the hope that that we'll continue to spread them. We'd love to see it in all the schools in Chicago. As part of that, CPS has totally revamped their approach to civics, although I have to say it builds on a lot of great things that the city, many teachers and schools in the city have been doing for a long time, including being leaders in the service project learning space. But part of this is the new capstone civics course, service learning I mentioned, the encouragement of student voting, and we had student registration activities in the as part of that, and what are called student voice committees, which are these great vehicles for giving students actual participation in the governance of the school. And so the schools themselves model being places of democratic practice, because I don't know what your experience in school was, that schools aren't always models of democratic practice, and they can be. And at least one of the students, I think one of the others may not have, Barbara Cruz is here, Right? So Barbara, stand up. Barbara is one of the student leaders in this work. And also we just learned, so Barbara's been setting up a lot of these committees, and we also just learned you're going to be going off to Cornell next year. Great. And is also a member of the Posse program, so they'll be part of a posse going out to Cornell. So if you know that great program to have colleague support as cohorts of students go off to great places like Cornell, so that's fabulous. The mayor himself is a great champion of civic education, and you may know often, I don't know whether it's unannounced, but he goes out to schools and he teaches civics and has conversations on civics in schools all across the city. So I mentioned Principal Estrada of Elcott, so let's hear from him on his take on the role of civics.
It's important for me, particularly for the kids that we provide for here, to understand that there is a way of problem solving. That there is we don't have to just cross our hands and say there isn't anything that we can do, and schooling them, educating them as to what it means to be empowered civically and how the process works really leads them to down that path. It's teaching them not only about surviving itself, but teaching them how to become leaders, teaching them how to problem solve, teaching them how to go to the right individuals, to talk to the right people, to understand how the system works, whether it's at a low-level school community environment or it's a high-level, the mayor's office.
Thank you again, Principal Estrada. And as I mentioned earlier, there are many nonprofit civic education groups that are leaders and partners in this working both inside the classroom and after school. I want to mention just the Constitutional Rights Foundation creates such wonderful hands-on programs for teachers and students, including as early as the second grade. And I think it's important, and I know CPS is working. This isn't only about senior year high school. This is about with the new social studies curriculum, about how it starts from basically first or second grade on through college. Facing History in Ourselves, Bonnie Oberman is here. It does such a great job using the history of the Holocaust and other genocides to help kids understand the impact of the moral choices that we all make. News Literacy Project brings real news and real journalists into the classroom to help students understand what do they do with this avalanche of digital stuff that comes at them every day, and sort out what to believe and not. The McCormick Challenge develops youth by allowing them to participate in all sorts of authentic activities, including, you may know, just in the last election, I think, Brian Brady can tell me, I think 1,600 MCFA Challenge students served as election judges in polls all across the city, which I think is just a fabulous thing. And it organized into debates and participation in campaigns of the political campaigns on a very, nonpartisan basis as far as MCFA is concerned, but the kids get out and really get involved. So I wanted you to hear from an alum of the MCFA Challenge. Augustine Flores, back in 2010, was the first youth commissioner for the Mayor's Advisory Council, and he and his colleagues had the opportunity to identify issues, work on them together, and then take them to the mayor. So here's Augustine.
The Youth Commission, what we do is we essentially serve as an advisory type council. We bring youth voice to the mayor. And so we focus on citywide issues that are affecting young people in Chicago. I think everyone in Chicago really has heard stories about how the mayor comes up very strong, intimidating, and you definitely have to go into the meetings prepared. That first summer, we created a survey in which we asked young people about a variety of problems and which ones they thought were most important and most affected their everyday life. and transportation came up as one of them. And so we just started looking at the relationship between and the everyday interaction between young people and the CTA. What stemmed from that was an altogether program, or a pilot program, that is now providing free fare for low-income students in 5 schools, 100 students in each school. And so we're working with the University of Chicago and the mayor and our council to see whether or not providing free fare for low-income students improves attendance.
Good work, Augustine. He couldn't be here today. Augustine worked for a time, full-time, after graduating high school, worked full-time with MCFA for a time and is now back at UIC, completing his degree. So a great leader and continued future leader. So from all of this, we believe that we do know what works, and there's a whole lot of progress being made across the city and state. But what we need to do now is spread it and scale it and make sure it reaches all parts of the city and all the schools in the state. And recognizing this issue, in 2014, the General Assembly set up a task force on civic education and asked them to come back with recommendations on how to improve civic literacy and education across the state. The task force met for much of last year, right through the end of the year, and had public hearings all across the state. And in this regard, I want to thank Illinois State Senator Tom Cullerton and Illinois State Representatives Deb Conroy and Michael Connolly for their leadership when they were members of the task force. Is Representative Conroy here today? Oh, special session. Gosh, rather than be here. But yeah, but they've been, and we're hopeful that indications are they're likely to organize, draft the legislation to come back and to adopt the recommendations that the task force has made. So the recommendations were based on the review of everything that's going on in the state and other states, and briefly, the recommendations were that we do have a requirement for a civics course to graduate, that we revise and modernize the social studies standards so that they would cover skills, civic skills, as well as just knowledge and content elements. Happy to say that under the leadership of Chris Cook, the Illinois State Board of Education has already launched this work. Another is the Service Learning Project, and a couple of them making sure that once we've identified these best practices, that they're embedded in the teacher certification requirements, as well as, and here's really, really important, so that there's quality professional development support for the teachers to be well equipped to do all these things. And then finally, like some of the things that CPS is doing, that we do whatever we can in the schools to get students registered and ready to vote. And we made some real progress on this. In fact, it was an example of a civic engagement. A lot of it was led by students, the effort to pass suffrage at 17, which happened last year, and in-school registration that with the Board of Elections and with the CPS leadership, so we're well on our way there. So 2015 now gives us the opportunity to adopt these things and continue to make these changes. Thanks to some of the great newspapers, there's been excellent press coverage of these issues. We had a wonderful front page story in the Chicago Tribune talking about the work of the task force. In early December, even more recently, I think there was a Wall Street Journal article on this. It's really building momentum and steam. The Paul Simon Institute did a survey that found overwhelming public support for the primary parts of the recommendations, including both the civic course requirement and civic learning. So it's hopefully be introduced soon, and all of us in this room, we can model civic engagement now ourselves by becoming part of the effort to have these recommendations be adopted. So what can we all do? As soon as the legislation is proposed, we can contact our officials and let them know our support for it. We can encourage our local school officials, even without waiting for the legislative changes, to continue to do the things that so many districts have already begun. If your students or teachers or administrators continue to spread the work and get it into other classrooms and schools, civic organizations that are involved in this kind of education work, just please keep doing what you're doing, and also be sure, as I know you will, join the effort to bring the message to Springfield how important this is. All of us talk to our neighbors and friends, as our poll would show we're already doing, and talk to your family, talk to your kids at dinner. That's like so many parts of education, it ought to begin in the family and within the discussions, and then obviously continue to vote. So there's a lot to do. We're just at the start of the year, but I wanted you to hear from one last person. There's a student named Amira who worked with a program of the Constitutional Rights Foundation.
You can tell me whatever you want to, that we can't do anything, or we're just children, or we can't make a difference in the world. But all I would say right back is just watch. Watch me change the world. Watch me give back to my community. Watch me make a change in everybody's life. So I feel like overall this project has really made me realize that I am who I am, and who I want to be is somebody who I am gonna be.
When I get her last name, I'm going to vote for her. I bet, well, yeah, a write-in. Yeah, but boy, but that is what it is, that's what this is about. It's about connecting young people to their civic future. And there's a little bit more information. I think there are some brochures on the tables that talk a little bit more about this, and I would only say thank you. If you will be part of this, please try to help, and thanks for having me here. Thank you.
Well, I think, you know, when someone like Mr. Hiller comes and gives you so much information, we ought to have a ton of questions. I see one. Graham has his hand up. Could somebody get that one up to me? We've got a few up here. I don't know, Dan. If I haven't read it, I don't know what you might ask me. So his question is about gerrymandering and how is a student supposed to be civically engaged when it seems like every time you turn around, one party or the other is moving something. And that question was not prompted by Christy. He's way in the back of the room.
Dan, thanks for that question. I think it's a very, very good question, and it's one that's can be very well dealt with in the schools as in terms of a big issue that faces our state. I personally believe that redistricting reform would be one of the biggest and best changes that we could make in terms of improving the politics and governance in the state. Yes, yeah. Yes, for Independent Maps made a good run at that. They had some issues on the signatures and ran into another mikvah in the courts, and it's a complicated issue, but I completely agree with, if I understand your basic premise, that this notion that politicians pick their voters rather than the other way around is misguided and needs to be changed, and I'm hopeful that there are going to be efforts renewed to target changing this in 2016, likely again through a signature referendum to get on the ballot for 2016, and this time we'd push it over the top.
Christy Hefner asks, given the history of the state and local control of our schools on the one hand, and the compelling case for civic education on the other, what do you think of the national requirement for such programming?
A national requirement? I think in the spirit of federalism, I'd be content to begin with doing this in Illinois. And if we can get this adopted in Illinois, there are several other states. Florida recently adopted, Tennessee recently adopted, California just had a task force that reported back recommending similar changes. I wouldn't oppose a national one, but I think this is one where the 50 laboratories of the states would be a good path to follow.
Dan Gibbons of Tur Partners asks, and this may be for Mr. Hiller as well as Dr. Bennett, what would it take to restore civic learning to every CPS high school without waiting for the state? Could McCormick Partners and other organizations or foundations make that possible?
Well, Barbara may want to address this. I think the fact is that I think is so positive is that Barbara and the mayor and Arnie do have us on a path to do this. The intent was with the beginning with GCI that we'd first model it, and it's now in between 25 and 30 high schools, with the idea that this rolls out every place. So I don't think the CPS with Barbara's leadership and Arnie, we're not waiting for the state. So I love what CPS is doing, and along with the other the civic education partners and the funders like MacArthur and Joyce and Community Trust and Spencer Foundation who helped do this launch. We're rolling. We're not waiting, but we do think that it would be good, like best practices in other states, to get this instituted as a requirement and get it throughout the state of Illinois.
Okay, Mr. Hiller's already going to have to come back because we have way too many questions that we can't get in. Okay. I hope that's okay, Jay, if I just trumped you. Don't tell Dr. Green that I just made the decision on my own. So we have two questions here. Graham Grady is asking a question about the Whacker manual. I'm a downstater. I don't know anything about that. Was that something that was Chicago-esque? It was? Good, because I didn't know anything about that. And then there's also a question from Raul from the Resurrection Project about how we can use social media to engage and encourage the civic education.
Those are both great questions. So who here has heard of the Whacker manual? So I'm going to turn that one over to Paula Wolf. So does that go back to the plan of Illinois?
Daniel Burnham, it was what they used to educate in the schools.
It was in the Burnham, after the Burnham plan? Yes, that was what I was thinking. It's plainly something we should do again. It was omitted from my civic education class in high school. And but the question too about social media is so important, both the internet and all forms of social media, because that's where young people are living, and as Tony and Jerry would know too, it's become the channel through which a lot of news travels. Even if it's reported, edited news, it tends to circulate via the social media. And that's part of what the News Literacy Project is working on, is to help young people. Because it's funny. Everybody thinks that the young people are digitally native and natural, and to some extent they are. But what isn't natural is knowing, once you call up different screens and different things pop up, what is native is to be able to assess whether this is believable or not. And that takes work, and that's where the work of news literacy and civic education is so important. But it absolutely has to address the digital social media channels through which the communication is happening.
I think I've only got time, sorry, for a couple of more questions. But here's one about, do we have any information from the McCormick's perspective about the infrastructure and participation rates for people living in poverty with respect to civic engagement?
Yeah, I mentioned that briefly. There's a wealth of information on it. The basic point would be that almost all forms of civic participation fall off dramatically as you go as you move what do I say, as you lower educational level and income level. Education and income are huge determinatives of civic participation. One thing that's interesting, I didn't get into this, is that the voting, to some extent, is one of the most equitable forms of democratic participation, to some extent, but at least in the case of African Americans and whites. In fact, you may not know, in 2012, and they've been close for decades, within like 5 percentage points, and then partly likely with the influence of President Obama's candidacy, they were almost equal in 2008, and in 2012, African Americans in America voted at slightly higher rates than white people. I mentioned the biggest gaps, and they persisted for decades, is with Latinos and also Asian Americans, where the percentage difference is like 20 percentage points of less participation.
Like I said, I think we have lots of information that Mr. Hiller could glean, and we could glean from him, and he could share with us. But we're going to thank Mr. Hiller for his time. We're going to look forward to him coming again.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.